I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. SKALD is an ongoing fantasy serial. I've written it to be heard, not read, and there's no music, sound effects, or character actors. It's all me, and I do it in one single, flawless take. This episode starts where the last one ended, so if you're the type of person who needs to hear a story from the beginning, you might want to go back to some of the earlier episodes. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 17. The single, faint sun of that cold, desolate realm, set in the west. Set quickly, for it only had a mere 4 hours to make it across the sky, as empty and gray as the wasteland it looked down upon. 4 hours to scramble across the firmament, then recede behind that barren horizon, making way for the night to come. The interminable 20-hour night to come. The landscape, while desolate, while barren, while devoid of any signs of life, was not flat, smooth, or otherwise easy terrain. It was craggy, with angry piles of rock jutting out at unnatural angles, providing cover for the countless holes that dotted the landscape. And within those dark caves, within each of those treacherous hollows, something stirred. Looking down upon that desolate tundra was a single, steep hill. Though the landscape rolled erratically around it, the hill reached up beyond any of those simple, rocky mounds. The sole identifiable landmark in eyesight, maybe within the entire realm, and upon it, conceived by minds unknowable to our own, built by inhuman hands and raised up, a defiant gesture to the empty skies. Tower. So tall as to look surreal, unnatural in this rugged landscape, the tower appeared to have been, impossibly, carved from a single stone, with not one seam in the construction, with not a single inch of mortar visible in its facade. Tower was flawless, from its sturdy foundation right up to the highest floor, where 4 windows looked out to the 4 winds, and on the roof sat an ancient array of telescopes, now fallen into disrepair, but once built, refined, and positioned by ancient intellects, hungry for knowledge from the stars which had long since gone out, abandoning this realm to the growing darkness. But as that cold, dying sun beat its hasty retreat beyond the horizon, allowing the darkness to hungrily spread across the landscape, there was one place that resisted boldly. One place that dared to put a stop to the shadows that sped across the rocky earth. At the top of the tower, within the highest room, came a light, one that seemed to grow brighter as the sky darkened around it. And amidst the light, a set of frantic motions. She hurried around the circular room, lighting candles and muttering to herself. She moved quickly, but did not rush, as this was nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, she'd performed some variation on these very tasks at the beginning of every night for as long as she could remember. She had even followed this dire regimen back before she was left alone, left to wait endlessly and prepare. But though she worked tirelessly, moving around the room, her beautiful, elegant, but threadbare dress trailing behind her, she was exceedingly tired. For as long as she could remember, living inverted days, sleeping as that insufficient sun rushed frantically across the sky, then leaping into action as soon as it had set. It left her figure gaunt with exhaustion, her face pale from lack of sunlight, but within that sallow, sunken countenance, her eyes burned with determination. After lighting the candles, she peered out each of the 4 windows in turn, carefully scanning the landscape. She thought she saw movement, but there was still time yet. Precious little time, but time nonetheless. She ran to the simple pantry, set apart from the main room. Upon unlatching the door, she was unsurprised to find that her stores were complete. Row upon row of sustenance, of supplies, of wood for her fire. She grabbed a bundle, lugged it to the fireplace, and threw it whole upon the hot coals, which hungrily engulfed the dried wood and the scratchy twine that bound it together. Taking a long, worn wooden spoon, she stirred the pot that hung above the now blazing fire. Leaning in, she breathed deep of that fragrant smoke. A tiny grin passed over her visage before she allowed the determined grimace to take its place once again and returned dutifully to her labors. She walked quickly to the main entrance, then double-checked the metal beam that barred that thick, ancient, knotted wood door, the one that was as old as the tower itself, carved from some ancient species that had not been seen in this realm since long before the Sundering. Expectantly, she spared another peek outside each of the 4 windows. Full darkness was setting in quickly. She couldn't tell for sure, but it seemed to come on faster than even the day before. It rendered her unable to see clearly across the landscape, unable to examine the caves that dotted the wasteland. But she wasn't looking for the caves. She was looking what hid within them. As she stood and squinted, she saw the eyes begin to light up. Just a few at first, but multiplying quickly. Glowing, green, unnatural eyes gathering in the darkness, but not moving. Yet. She still had time. Precious little time, but time nonetheless. She returned to her work, moving even more quickly now, taking the bubbling, boiling pot from the fire, then hanging it over a brazier in the center of the room. She used a nearby poker to stoke the coals in the shallow pan, then went back to the raging fireplace where she placed a second, identical pot over the blaze. Glancing out the window, she saw nothing but darkness. It was almost time, just moments away. She strode back to the storage room, thinking better of her earlier decision. She entered and dug through the provisions until she found what she searched for. A side of dried ham. She took the meat, then dipped a water skin into a rain barrel, freshly filled despite the fact that this realm hadn't known rain or even clouds since before the sun began to wane. She went to the southern window. They would approach from all directions, so one window was as good as the other. But they hadn't come from the south in some time. She checked the chalk markings she had made on the smooth, unbroken stone wall. Concentrated approaches from the north, east, and west far outnumbered those from the south, especially recently. She dropped the water skin on a nearby table, then set about tearing into the ham, chewing with her mouth open as she stared at her makeshift ledger. Concentrated northern attack, 3 days ago. Flanking attacks from the east and west, 2 days ago. A southern feint and a concentrated force from the west the day after. Washing down the ham with the water skin, she racked her brain looking for a pattern. And shook her head, snapping herself out of her pointless calculations and reminding herself not to apply logic and sense, where there could be none. She turned back to the southern window and gazed out. The landscape was spotted with those glowing, green eyes, reminiscent of what she imagined a star-filled sky must have looked like. The eyes gleamed, but there was no intelligence within them, only lust, hatred, and a desire to tear down what wiser, more talented hands built up. She saw them stirring, the green eyes steadily approaching. She heard their ignorant cries and their imbecilic laughter getting closer by the second. There was no pattern to their movements. There was no strategy guiding their attacks. There was no purpose behind their blind, nescient urge to ravage an already ravaged landscape. As the gods had molded man, a mockery of themselves, so too did man create the trolls, an unholy exaggeration and perversion. The eyes moved steadily closer, preparing to climb the hill, preparing to ascend to the tower. Her eyes narrowed, and her fists clenched as she thought upon her goal that night, the same goal she had every night. Survive until the morning. Skog had always enjoyed her time alone in the forest. She loved Maul. He was dear to her in a way that the orphaned cat couldn't fully understand. But she was as wild as he was, and both needed frequent time to themselves. As the monk made his careful, steady way across the rope bridge, Skog had prowled through the woods, her keen eyes scanning the way ahead for game and for enemies, not realizing that the true threat had been behind them. The massive cat was deep enough in the forest, bounding through the thick brush, that she didn't hear the snap of the rope bridge giving way, that she didn't hear the screams of Maul and Xylan as they plummeted down into that deep crevasse, scrambling but failing to find purchase on those steep, rocky escarpments. Skog paused frequently to sniff the air, searching for the telltale musk of her savage companion and the nervous, unplaceable scent that seemed to surround the monk. She had ranged out of sight, out of earshot, but not out of range for her sensitive nose. She knew that she would pick up their scent once they crossed the bridge. To Skog's surprise, scent didn't come. She couldn't smell Maul or Xylan, but she did pick up the pungent aroma of a doe and heat. So she began tracking it, idly, indulging her predatory instincts while waiting for her companions to finish traversing the bridge. But still, scent didn't come. Like Maul, Skog's mood never drew from a wide pool of emotions. Rage, joy, hunger. These they felt, and felt more strongly than a civilized creature could ever imagine. But concern, anxiety, stress, these were not emotions that a majestic beast such as Skog was familiar with. But still, the scent didn't come, and it puzzled her. So Skog abandoned her hunt and she turned back, returning the ravine. When it was in sight, she noticed that the rope bridge was no longer there. The thought that perhaps she had come back to the wrong section didn't cross Skog's primitive mind. Her instincts, her spatial awareness, they were too highly honed for that kind of grotesque mistake. No, something was wrong. Something had happened. Skog knew it was true and began running at full speed for the gorge. Soon enough, Skog saw the bridge, broken from the far side, hanging down into that yawning chasm. She smelled where Maul and Xylan had been, but could tell they had been swallowed up by the earth. And when she peeked over the edge, she was overcome with one of her primary emotions, forced into the burning rage that was all too familiar to her. Because when she looked over, her massive head craning out over the canyon, she saw the culprit. The Farron raider clung to the far side of the fissure, his thin blade clenched between his teeth, favoring his bloodied left leg as he struggled to lower himself down. Skog was puzzled that she hadn't smelled the Farah, especially leaking blood as he was. But the Farah were as at home in the forests as Skog, and the raider was more than capable of cloaking his scent, his noise, his very presence, such that not even Skog could detect him. But now, Skog could detect him, and while she wasn't able to piece together exactly what happened, she knew enough. She knew that the Farah had hurt, possibly even killed Maul, and deep within she felt rage, mixed together with an even more dangerous emotion, one that she had rarely experienced in her wild life. Heartache over the loss of her companion. That potent blend of rage and agony bubbled up inside of her, blasting out of her jaws as a terrifying roar that echoed through the canyon, forcing the Farron raider to momentarily lose his grip, only saving himself by frantically clutching to a nearby root growing out of the side of the cliff face. The Farah had a head start, but not near as much as he would have liked. So after a quick glance up at the still roaring Skog, he began climbing down quicker, sinking his teeth into his blade in an effort to push the excruciating pain of his wounded leg out of his mind. He must make it down to the bottom. He must find the savage. He must obtain that long, twisting alabaster horn. He must return it to the arbor, and he must do it without falling prey to the monstrous cat looking down at him with those rage-filled eyes. In perfect health, the Farah could have practically ran down the sheer cliff faces that bound the ravine, run down them without suffering any ill effects. But now, his progress was hindered, a fact he tried to fight against through sheer force of will. He moved as quickly as he could because he knew he must, for the humongous cat beast had begun making her own way down into the canyon, leaping from ledge to ledge, stopping only to let out that bone-shaking, blood-curdling, agonized roar. Cry of one who thought they had banished loneliness, only to find it closing its jaws around them once again. And so they went. The Farah taking dangerous risks, dropping from heights he would normally never dream of, as he trusted more in his limited ability to catch himself than in the existence of any kind of mercy within the furious cat. Meanwhile, Skog's descent was even more reckless, as the massive cat frequently lost her footing, but instead of moving back to regain it, she simply plowed ahead, leaping from crumbling perch to precarious ledge, over and over again, and all the while gaining on the increasingly panicked Farah. Even with Skog's fearless, barely controlled plummet downward, the Farah was still the first to reach the foot of the canyon. A narrow bit of land that over millennia had been carved out by the quickly moving river that wound through the bottom of the ravine. The area was abandoned, desolate. It would have been serene if not for the circumstances and the two human bodies lying motionless near the bank of the river. The Farah, his wounded leg throbbing, aching, crying out for rest. He pushed himself forward, limping, skipping and hopping, anything to get to Maul's body as quickly as possible. Once there, he immediately began to dig for it, the prize, the other end of the bargain, that which Maul had wrongfully kept from the Farron people, willing to jeopardize their very existence. And for what? Custody of a girl he couldn't even care for? The Farah scowled at the sight of the savage, callous brute, but a smile began to creep across his face as he felt it. That long, twisting alabaster horn. The Farah wrapped his fingers around the horn, then cut the cord attaching it to the savage's neck. Maul had woken the last time this was attempted, but the brute looked in no condition to sit up and brutalize anyone. He was battered, broken, completely motionless. The Pharaoh couldn't even tell if Maul was breathing, so he clutched his knife, preparing to make sure that he wasn't. But before he could strike, he heard it again. Skald's roar. It was closer than ever. It would only be a matter of time before she was on level ground, and then there was no way he could outrun her. Even completely healthy, the cat would have overtaken him before he could even get up to top speed, so there was no time to finish off the savage, no time to water the ground with his blood, as Maul had done with the Pharaoh's fellow raiders. The Pharaoh, knowing that he couldn't simply outrun the cat beast, made for the river. He hoped to obscure the scent he hadn't had time to mask, to cover some kind of ground by swimming along with that quick current, then reemerge elsewhere, away from Skald's sharp eyes, away from her keen ears and her uncanny nose, counting on the fact that the cat wouldn't, perhaps even couldn't, swim. He secured the horn in a pouch at his waist, put his hands together, held his breath, then dove, disappearing under the water with not even a splash. As she reached the bottom of the ravine, Skald saw the Pharaoh dive into the water. But that wasn't all. She also saw what the Pharaoh had taken from her companion. That long, twisting, alabaster horn. Still unaware of her companion's fate, Skald was faced with two choices. Go to Maul now, allowing the horn and the Farron thief that held it to disappear into the forest, never to be found again. Or go after it. Bounding alongside the riverbed, teeth bared, she chose the latter. The agony, the pain of loss, they swelled up inside Skald, but she knew that if Maul was alive, he would want the horn. He would be cheered by its return, and he would stroke her in her favorite spot, the one only he knew about, the tiny spot behind her jaw, speaking gently to her in the quiet way that he did when no one else was around. But if he was dead, broken by the fall into the ravine, well, even if Skald's heart was empty, at least her stomach would be full. If you like Skald, please help spread the word with a review on iTunes or Stitcher. It helps new people find the podcast, and if you say nice stuff, I'll read it on the show. This iTunes review comes from YOLO Blaze It 420, which, fun fact, was actually my grandfather's middle name. Hieronymus YOLO Blaze It 420 Sitterson. Never has there been a podcast so mighty, an audio experience so extraordinary, a story so brutally mind-bending as SKALD. Modern-day bard Aubrey Sitterson delivers in spades on this wholly original concept. SKALD is a brain-bashingly great podcast. SKALD is waiting for you when you get up each and every Thursday morning, and that's because of the generosity of the show's Patreon supporters. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that allows you to pledge small, monthly dollar amounts to help pay for the things you love. Things like SKALD. $1 a month is nothing. It works out to $0.25 per episode. So if you want SKALD to be here next week, and every week afterward, please sign up at patreon.com/SKALD. It's safe, secure, and easy. I am all over the internet. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, they're all Aubrey Sitterson. No spaces, no numbers. Or head over to my website, aubreysitterson.com, for links to everything, including social media, my non-SKALD related projects, comics, podcasts, t-shirts, credits, bio, and contact information. Time for Aubrey's recommendation corner. I'm not sure when it was added, but the Arnold Schwarzenegger starring Conan the Barbarian is now on Netflix. Obviously, Robert E. Howard's most famous creation is a big influence on me and, of course, SKALD. While the 1982 flick does take some liberties with Conan's character, it's still a fantastic, psychotic fantasy trip with awesome effects, especially for the time period. Treat yourself to it one night soon. You deserve it. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.